President Donald Trump has initiated direct peace talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin, reportedly excluding Ukraine and European allies from these discussions. This approach has led to apprehensions in Ukraine and Europe about being sidelined in decisions that directly affect their security and territorial integrity. Financial Times. Additionally, reports indicate that President Trump plans to withdraw U.S. troops from NATO's front line in the Baltics as part of a broader strategy to reorient U.S. military focus towards China. This potential withdrawal could leave countries like Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania more vulnerable to Russian aggression, further complicating the security landscape in Eastern Europe. The Scottish Sun. European response and challenges. In response to the U.S. shift, European leaders are striving to maintain a unified stance on Ukraine. An emergency summit in Paris was convened to discuss the crisis, highlighting Europe's challenges in balancing relations with both the U.S. and Russia. European officials are concerned that the U.S. may concede too much to Russia, potentially compromising Ukraine's security and sovereignty. The Guardian. Furthermore, European nations are under pressure to increase their defense spending and consider deploying peacekeeping troops to Ukraine. The UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer has expressed openness to deploying British troops for peacekeeping purposes, emphasizing the importance of concrete European defense commitments. Latest news and breaking headlines. Ukraine's position. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has expressed frustration at being excluded from U.S.-Russia peace talks, asserting that such discussions would be unproductive without Ukraine's involvement. He emphasized the need for security guarantees from the U.S. and criticized the inconsistency of U.S. support. Zelensky's concerns reflect the broader apprehension in Ukraine about potential concessions that could compromise its territorial integrity and sovereignty. Wall Street Journal. Conclusion. The evolving dynamics of the Russia-Ukraine war, coupled with shifts in U.S. foreign policy, present significant challenges for Ukraine. The potential reduction in U.S. support and the exclusion of Ukraine from critical peace negotiations underscore the need for a robust and unified response from European nations to ensure Ukraine's security and territorial integrity. Recent developments in the Russia-Ukraine war. Latest news and breaking headlines. Keir Starmer will act as bridge to Trump and Ukraine peace talks. Today, Wall Street Journal. Ukraine Zelensky, left out of U.S.-Russia talks, sees little chance for progress. Today, Financial Times. Donald Trump opens the door to Vladimir Putin's grandest ambitions. 4 days ago, the shift in U.S. policy regarding the Russia-Ukraine conflict is creating a volatile situation for Ukraine, with the country's sovereignty and territorial integrity at stake. The exclusion of Ukrainian leaders from crucial U.S.-Russia discussions raises concerns that critical issues may be decided without Ukraine's input, potentially leaving them vulnerable to further aggression from Russia. In addition, the U.S. military strategy, which has been focused on containing Russia through NATO alliances, may change under the potential withdrawal of U.S. troops from NATO's eastern flank. This could embolden Russia further, while creating a security vacuum that European nations may struggle to fill. The situation is compounded by increasing tensions within NATO, with some members more inclined toward diplomacy, while others advocate for a stronger military response to ensure Ukraine's defense. The shifting landscape means that Europe is under increasing pressure to act independently and strategically. While European powers like the UK are discussing peacekeeping missions and increased defense spending, there is no consensus on the exact approach. The unity of the European Union itself is being tested, as some nations with more direct interests in Russia, like Hungary and Bulgaria, may hesitate to support tougher stances against Moscow. For Ukraine, the risks of losing U.S. backing are particularly alarming. The Ukrainian government has relied heavily on U.S. military aid to defend its territory, including advanced weaponry and training for its forces. If this support dwindles, Ukraine's ability to hold off Russian advances will be severely compromised, and the specter of territorial losses looms large. The growing concern in Ukraine is that the international community, particularly the U.S., may seek a quick resolution to the conflict to reduce its involvement, which could result in compromises that undermine Ukraine's independence. Such a situation could lead to a fragile peace, leaving Ukraine to navigate ongoing tensions with Russia on its own. In summary, as the U.S. redefines its role in the Russia-Ukraine war, Ukraine faces an uncertain future. The country is caught in a complex web of international diplomacy, balancing support from the West with the threat of further Russian expansion. Europe's role will be critical in filling the potential void left by the U.S., but unity and decisiveness will be key to ensuring Ukraine's continued defense and sovereignty. The situation remains fluid, and the international community's response will determine the outcome of the war in the coming months. As the U.S. adjusts its stance, other global players are watching closely, and some may see this as an opportunity to exert more influence over the region. Russia, for its part, may try to capitalize on the potential withdrawal of U.S. support, pushing forward with its goals in Ukraine and possibly seeking to destabilize further parts of Eastern Europe. The U.S. shift could lead to an increase in Russian activities, particularly in countries that were previously under Soviet influence. Meanwhile, the U.S. domestic political landscape adds another layer of complexity. The shifting focus on China and a potential desire to reduce commitments in Europe might align with some U.S. political factions, but contradict others who emphasize the strategic importance of maintaining a strong military and diplomatic presence in Europe to counter Russia's aggression. This internal division in the U.S. makes it harder to predict a coherent, long-term foreign policy, and this uncertainty adds to Ukraine's insecurity. The geopolitical ripple effects could also extend beyond Europe. If the U.S. reduces its engagement with Ukraine and Russia, it might embolden other authoritarian regimes, such as China, which has shown increasing interest in asserting its power in Asia. Beijing's ambitions, including the potential to challenge the status quo in Taiwan or the South China Sea, could find a more permissive global environment if U.S. attention is diverted away from traditional spheres of influence. For Ukraine, the ongoing war is not just a regional conflict. It has become a symbolic battle for democratic values versus authoritarianism. If Western nations begin to backtrack on their support, the message sent to countries fighting similar battles for sovereignty could be devastating. Ukraine has, over the past few years, established itself as a symbol of resistance against Russian imperialism, and its fall or diplomatic isolation could shift the balance in the global struggle for influence between democracies and autocracies. Domestically, Ukrainian society is grappling with the physical and psychological toll of war. The war has displaced millions, destroyed critical infrastructure, and claimed thousands of lives. However, it has also fostered a sense of unity among the Ukrainian people, and they continue to seek international support not just for their immediate defense, but for long-term stability and rebuilding. As the conflict drags on, Ukraine has also been investing in its military, strengthening its defenses to better withstand any future Russian offensives. Moreover, there is a growing recognition among Ukrainian leaders that, regardless of foreign support, they need to rely on their own resources and innovation. Ukraine has been focusing on strengthening its cyber capabilities and fortifying its economy to ensure it can stand strong in the face of continued conflict and shifting international dynamics. The private sector, particularly in tech, has seen significant growth, and Ukraine is working to become a key player in global cybersecurity. The humanitarian crisis remains dire. Thousands of civilians have died, and millions have fled their homes, creating an enormous refugee population. The international community has stepped in with aid, but it is often not enough. The infrastructure damage in Ukraine's most affected areas is overwhelming, and there is a growing need for long-term solutions to help the displaced and to rebuild cities and towns reduced to rubble. The situation is made more complex by Russia's continued targeting of civilian infrastructure, further exacerbating the challenges of recovery. Looking ahead, it remains to be seen whether the U.S. will maintain its level of involvement in Ukraine or whether it will fully pivot its focus to Asia. However, the international community will need to determine whether it can form a united front to prevent Russia from achieving its aims through force and intimidation. Ukraine's survival and future in this conflict may hinge not only on the resolve of its own people, but also on the determination of global powers to protect the principles of sovereignty, democracy, and territorial integrity. In conclusion, Ukraine stands at a pivotal moment in its history. With or without U.S. support, it must navigate an increasingly complex geopolitical landscape, balancing the need for internal unity, the desire for continued international support, and the reality of dealing with an aggressive neighbor. The choices made by the U.S., European nations, and other global powers will shape the future not just of Ukraine, but of the broader global order in the coming years. As Ukraine continues to grapple with both military challenges and the shifting international landscape, the future of its sovereignty and territorial integrity will be influenced by several critical factors. The role of international law and diplomatic pressure will remain vital. Ukraine has been outspoken about its right to self-determination and territorial integrity under international law, and the world's response to these claims could either strengthen or weaken Ukraine's position on the global stage. The United Nations, along with various regional organizations, will likely play a significant role in mediating or preventing further escalation. However, the effectiveness of these institutions in curbing Russian aggression is questioned due to the power dynamics within the UN Security Council, where Russia wields veto power. Despite this, the UN and other international actors can still exert diplomatic pressure through sanctions, economic measures, and providing humanitarian aid. In the realm of diplomacy, the role of non-Western powers, particularly China and India, will continue to be scrutinized. These nations have not openly condemned Russia's actions in Ukraine and have maintained a neutral or even supportive stance. The growing ties between Russia, China, and other authoritarian regimes, such as Iran, could further complicate global efforts to isolate Russia diplomatically. As these countries seek to counterbalance U.S. and European influence, Ukraine could find itself not only facing military threats, but also navigating a complex web of shifting alliances. On the ground, the Ukrainian military is becoming more resilient with each passing day. While the conflict has drained vast resources, it has also fostered innovation in tactics and technology. Ukrainian forces have utilized advanced weaponry from international partners effectively, with significant assistance from NATO countries. The introduction of more sophisticated defense systems, such as air defense missiles and drones, has enabled Ukraine to challenge Russia's military dominance and resist occupation in critical areas. But beyond the battlefield, Ukraine is engaging in an ideological struggle to preserve its identity and its ties to Europe. The population is increasingly focused on ensuring that the war does not erode the democratic values they have fought for. A central aspect of Ukraine's survival is the integration of its economy and governance into European structures, including aligning with EU standards and processes. Even in the midst of war, Ukraine continues its efforts to pursue membership in the European Union, viewing it as a pathway to long-term stability and prosperity. However, the road to EU membership remains uncertain. The EU is also undergoing its own internal struggles, with debates over enlargement, economic cohesion, and maintaining unity amidst rising populism and nationalism. For Ukraine, the European dream is a powerful symbol of hope. Yet it faces the harsh reality of waiting for membership in a region where economic and political conditions are in flux. Internally, the war has sparked significant social changes in Ukraine. There is a renewed focus on national unity, with various ethnic and regional groups rallying around the shared goal of defeating Russian aggression. Despite occasional tensions between different groups in the pre-war period, there has been a notable rise in solidarity as Ukrainians across the country, regardless of background, have unified in their resistance to foreign occupation. However, the long-term consequences of the war are yet to unfold. If the war drags on, the economic toll on Ukraine could be immense. Reconstruction efforts, once the fighting subsides, will require vast amounts of investment, and the task of rebuilding not just physical infrastructure, but the economy will take years. As millions of displaced Ukrainians seek refuge abroad, the country could face challenges in reintegrating them and ensuring a stable post-war economy. As the war enters its second year, the potential for negotiations or peace talks remains a distant hope. While some have called for a ceasefire or diplomatic solution, such talks seem unlikely to succeed without a significant shift in Russia's stance. As things stand, Russia shows no interest in withdrawing its forces or offering meaningful concessions. In contrast, Ukraine's resolve to defend its territory remains firm, and its leadership is determined not to accept a settlement that leaves Russia in control of any Ukrainian land. Ukraine's continued reliance on international support remains a pivotal factor. While Europe and the U.S. have been essential in providing military and financial assistance, much of Ukraine's future rests on its ability to manage its domestic defense efforts and sustain its resilience. The growth of Ukrainian civil society, its media, and its political institutions are all important aspects of the country's ability to recover from the war and rebuild itself as a strong, independent democratic state. Looking ahead, the trajectory of the Russia-Ukraine war may not only influence the NS. However, the growing focus on China and the increasing demand for American attention in the Indo-Pacific region are causing concerns about the long-term sustainability of U.S. support for Ukraine. There are also voices in the U.S. calling for a shift in policy, arguing that the war has already stretched American resources and that it is time to negotiate a settlement with Russia. Meanwhile, European powers, while united in their condemnation of Russia's aggression, are also facing internal political challenges. Countries like Hungary have been hesitant to fully align with Western sanctions on Russia, while others like Poland and the Baltic states are adamant about supporting Ukraine and curbing Russian expansion in Europe. The European Union's approach is increasingly influenced by these internal divisions, leading to concerns about its ability to maintain a cohesive strategy on the war. 6. Future prospects in global security. Looking ahead, the future of the war is highly uncertain. Some analysts speculate that the war may continue for many years, as neither side is likely to achieve a decisive military victory in the short term. Ukraine's forces continue to show resilience, but the Russian military's ability to sustain long-term pressure also remains a factor. As the conflict becomes more entrenched, the potential for new escalations, such as attacks on NATO members, the use of more advanced weapons, or even the possibility of nuclear threats, could create an even more volatile situation. The war's outcome could have broader consequences for global security. If Russia is able to maintain control over parts of Ukraine or force a settlement that is favorable to its strategic interests, it could embolden other autocratic regimes and potentially lead to further territorial disputes in Europe, Asia, or the Middle East. Conversely, if Ukraine is able to reclaim territory and secure its sovereignty, it would send a powerful message to the world about the importance of defending democratic values and the territorial integrity of nations. In conclusion, the Russia-Ukraine war remains one of the most significant geopolitical crises of the 21st century. It is a battle not just for Ukraine's survival, but for the future of international order, global security, and the principles that govern relations between nations. With no clear end in sight, the conflict will continue to reshape the world's political, economic, and military landscape for years to come. Fate of Ukraine, but could also determine the broader direction of global geopolitics. The war has exposed deep divisions within international organizations, alliances, and governments. For many, it is no longer just a regional conflict, but a test of the international order and the resolve of democracies in the face of growing authoritarianism. In the coming months, Ukraine will continue to fight for its existence, hoping that the world's commitment to its cause remains unwavering. The question is whether the international community, led by NATO, the U.S., and the European Union, will continue to support Ukraine, or whether internal political pressures and external challenges will shift the focus elsewhere. In conclusion, the future of the Russia-Ukraine war is uncertain and hinges on a multitude of factors: military dynamics, international alliances, diplomatic negotiations, and the resilience of the Ukrainian people. What is clear is that the outcome will have profound consequences not just for Ukraine, but for the entire world. The decisions made now will shape the geopolitical landscape for generations to come. As the Russia-Ukraine war continues to evolve, new developments and strategies are constantly emerging, affecting both the battlefield and global politics. The war is not only a military conflict, but a complex struggle that intertwines regional power dynamics, economic systems, and international relations. To understand the full scope of the ongoing war, it's important to examine several key areas. 1. Military strategy and tactics. The conflict has witnessed the evolution of both Russian and Ukrainian military strategies. Ukraine, initially caught off guard by Russia's swift invasion in February 2022, has adapted its defense strategies with the help of NATO intelligence and modern weaponry. Ukrainian forces have become increasingly adept at using advanced technology, such as drones, anti-tank missiles, and long-range artillery to inflict significant damage on Russian supply lines and command structures. Guerrilla tactics and the effective use of cyber warfare have also given Ukraine a critical edge. On the Russian side, while the initial blitzkrieg strategy failed, the Russian military has focused on overwhelming Ukraine with artillery and missile strikes aimed at destabilizing critical infrastructure. Russia has strategically targeted Ukrainian energy facilities, water supplies, and transportation routes to break the morale of the Ukrainian people and disrupt their ability to fight back. Despite the devastation, Ukrainian forces have managed to hold key cities and push back in various regions, preventing Russia from achieving its goal of quickly toppling the government. 2. Civilian impact and humanitarian crisis. The human toll of the war is staggering. Cities like Mariupol, Kharkiv, and Kiev have been bombarded, with thousands of civilians killed or wounded and millions more displaced. Ukraine faces one of the largest refugee crises in Europe since World War II. As of early 2025, over 10 million Ukrainians have fled the country, seeking asylum primarily in neighboring EU countries such as Poland, Germany, and Hungary. This has created immense challenges for those countries, as they must manage the influx of refugees while providing them with housing, food, medical care, and psychological support. The war has also led to severe shortages of basic goods in Ukraine, including food, medicine, and fuel. International aid organizations are working around the clock to provide essential relief, but the ongoing conflict and damaged infrastructure make the delivery of aid difficult. As the war drags on, the civilian suffering only intensifies, and the need for peace and stability becomes ever more urgent. 3. Economic impact. The war has severely impacted both Ukraine's and Russia's economies. For Ukraine, the destruction of factories, agricultural fields, and transportation hubs has caused significant economic disruption. Ukrainian industries, particularly agriculture, which have been a cornerstone of its economy, are struggling to recover due to destroyed infrastructure and continued military threat. On the other hand, Russia's economy has also faced considerable challenges. Despite sanctions, Russia has been able to secure economic ties with countries like China and India, which have continued to purchase oil and gas. However, the long-term effects of international sanctions, the loss of access to global markets, and the potential decline of Russian oil revenues could lead to a prolonged economic downturn. The Russian ruble has seen significant devaluation, and inflation has surged, making life more difficult for ordinary Russians, despite state efforts to stabilize the economy. Additionally, global markets have been affected by the war, with energy prices fluctuating and the agricultural supply chain facing disruptions, especially in Europe and parts of Asia. As Ukraine is a major global exporter of grain and other agricultural products, the war has sent shockwaves through food prices worldwide. The war has thus not only impacted Ukraine and Russia, but has had global economic ramifications, particularly in energy and food security. 4. Diplomatic efforts and peace talks. Diplomatic efforts have been an ongoing but difficult aspect of the war. Early in the conflict, there were attempts at negotiating a ceasefire, but these efforts faltered as Russia's demands, such as the recognition of Crimea and the independence of separatist regions in eastern Ukraine, were seen as unacceptable by the Ukrainian government and its allies. As the war has dragged on, Ukraine has remained steadfast in its demand for a full Russian withdrawal from Ukrainian territory, including Crimea and Donbass. Ukraine has also pushed for international guarantees of its security and sovereignty, particularly from NATO and the EU. However, Russia has refused to back down, continuing to claim that its objectives are to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, which it frames as a long-standing threat to Russian security. Over the course of the conflict, there have been several attempts at peace talks, often brokered by third-party nations such as Turkey and Israel. Yet, there has been little progress in reaching a durable peace agreement, as both sides maintain fundamentally irreconcilable positions. Russia, feeling backed into a corner and facing international isolation, has shown little willingness to compromise, while Ukraine, bolstered by international support, has been resolute in its refusal to cede any territory. 5. Role of global powers. The Russia-Ukraine war has become a proxy battle for global powers, with the U.S., NATO, and European Union playing key roles in providing military, economic, and diplomatic support to Ukraine. The U.S. has been particularly active in sending military aid, including advanced weapon systems, intelligence sharing, and training for Ukrainian forces. In addition, financial support has been essential for Ukraine's economy, with billions of dollars in aid flowing from the West.